Your insiders are Dregs, Pierre, and Frank. And gentlemen, if it wasn't for Buffalo, both Monday night and overall, we'd be spending more time talking about the Flyers' struggles the last month. Shane Gostisbehere on waivers on Monday, and Carter Hart going through the first real struggles of his young career. How do they deal with that, Pierre, as the deadline approaches?
Yeah, it's been a real struggle for Carter Hart, James. And my understanding is that the Flyers front office is having that discussion internally. Do they go out and get goaltending help before the April 12th trade deadline? Allow Carter Hart to have a bit of a reset, work on his game. Brian Elliott's been a pro, but he might need help. But on the flip side, what does that do to Carter Hart if you do that? So there's pros and cons to all this, and that's what I believe they're discussing. The other thing is the Flyers have to stay in the race. I mean, the next 7 games for the deadline will really be important in terms of Flyers wanting to add, no matter where it is, if they're not playing better. But one name to retain if they do decide to add a goalie, Jonathan Bernier, I believe, on the radar of the Flyers pending UFA for Detroit.
Driggs, it was painful watching the Sabres find yet another way to lose. Anything more on the possibility of big names being dealt?
Well, I mean, specifically, we're looking at Taylor Hall. I can tell you this, James, that the agent for Taylor Hall, Darren Ferris, spoke with Kevin Adams, the general manager for the Buffalo Sabres, on Monday. And obviously, they talked about the variety of trade scenarios that might be encouraged, directed at Taylor Hall. There are some even that have interest in a trade and sign. Kevin Adams is wrestling on what the return should look like. And as you get closer to the April 12th trade deadline, obviously he becomes less of a cap hit. So maybe there's some upside in that. Maybe the price actually stays at what the ask might be at this stage. So nothing definite. As for the captain, Jack Eichel, he continues to go through treatment. He is seeing a specialist. The expectation is that he could have imaging on his injury as early as next week. And then the Sabres and Jack Eichel will have a better understanding of his progress at that point.
The progress is going to take a while for Aaron Ekblad, who is having such a great season for the Florida Panthers. Frank, we know they can't replace him, but how do they fill the hole?
Well, James, as you might imagine, Bill Zito, their GM, his phone was ringing from 30 other general managers this week offering a life raft that may or may not be disguised as an anchor. And so Bill Zito is turning over every stone at this point. He's looking at all of his options that are on the table, some suspects that are on our trade bait board, some guys that may be more hockey deals, maybe even a waiver claim in the form of a Shane Gostisbehere. He's considering everything that's out there, knowing that, one, he can't replace Aaron Ekblad, and two, that he has limited currency to do so. He's not interested in trading picks and or prospects, so he's going to have to do some searching in order to try and fill the void for Aaron Ekblad.
This will be our first trade center where Seattle factors in, Pierre, as far as the decisions that teams make, correct?
Yeah, I mean, Ron Francis, for a guy who doesn't have any players to put out there himself, is getting more and more calls, is what I'm being told, from teams around the league who are trying to feel him out and say, well, listen, if I make this trade, what would it take from you that I don't lose this fourth defenseman, for example? And those are the types of conversations that teams are having with Ron Francis. And what I'm told is the price is pretty high, that in some cases it's a first and a prospect is what Ron Francis is saying. And so that's sort of scaring off teams from trading for another player. So these are interesting conversations. And remember, at the trade deadline in 2017, there was an understanding between Pittsburgh and Vegas on Marc-Andre Fleury. It didn't come out that day. It came out in June. But that day, and Jim Rutherford confirms this, the understanding was that Fleury was going to be taken in the expansion draft. Pittsburgh would also send a second-round pick. And George McPhee and Jim Rutherford had an understanding. They had a verbal agreement, nothing official. Seattle is allowed to do that leading up to the deadline if it wants. But, of course, it also doesn't have to. So it adds a bit of intrigue.
And, Frank, north of Seattle, Vancouver has some serious RFA work to do.
Yeah, and they got to work on their 6-day break, starting with Thatcher Demko engaging in what I think is fair to call substantive discussions on what an extension might look like. I don't think they're close, but the timing of how Jim Benning puts the pieces together in this puzzle with both Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes also as pending restricted free agents will be interesting to see. It might help to get Demko done first, knowing what you have left to spend on those two guys.
Well, speaking of free agents, guys, it sounds like there's progress being made on pending unrestricted free agent Tanner Pearson. I know that the Vancouver Canucks spoke with Pearson's agent, Joe Resnick. It's not done yet, but the belief is that they are making progress. Again, a lot of work to get done, but both sides are optimistic.
Insider trading on TSN Hockey.